Hello, everybody. Hope you are safe and sound and everything is okay. I'm Rajalanto, coming from Technical Research Center Finland, so VTT. And now I'm going to give you a short introduction to our InnoFood Africa project. So please give me a couple of seconds and I share the slide presentation with you. InnoFood Africa is a research and innovation action project implemented in cooperation with European and African partners, and it is funded by the European Commission and its framework called Horizon 2020. We have altogether 18 partners, of which 13 come from 4 African countries and 5 European partners. And all these partners, they are either research and technology organizations, universities, non-governmental organizations, or private companies. The duration of InnoFood Africa project is at the moment, or is planned to be 3 years, but we have applied 6 months extension from the Commission due to the challenges we have faced because of the prevailing COVID-19 situation. The total European Commission funding for the project is 6.5 million euros. Our consortium is shown here. So from Africa, we have partners from Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and South Africa. And from South Africa, we have University of Pretoria, and also Delphus Technologies, which is a company that develops technologies for food processing equipment. And then from Europe, we have Nofima coming from Norway, VTT together with Helsinki University from Finland, Puratos, which is a big food company from Belgium, and L'Institut d'Acron and INRA, which are sort of a combined research organization coming from France. Here you can see the consortium a little bit more in detail and their main expertises that are used or utilized in InnoFood Africa project. I don't run you through the slide. I only wish to sort of emphasize that the expertise we use in InnoFood Africa project are food and biomass technology and processing expertise, agricultural expertise, dietary and nutrition knowledge and expertise, and also consumer business value chain and social sciences expertise. InnoFood Africa project aims at creating new value chains and new business models in order to produce and distribute healthy foods and food ingredients, and also biopackaging materials from crop side streams. And these value chains cover the whole agri-food chain, starting from farms, ending up to local and national and export markets. And from the export markets, we are particularly heading towards Europe. InnoFood Africa demonstrates the potential, particularly of indigenous traditional African crops like Bambara, groundnut, Cowpea, sweet potato, millet, sorghum, teff, faba bean, banana, and so forth. And from these crops, healthy food and food ingredients are developed for combating against malnutrition of infants, small children, and pregnant women, and also adults, particularly in urban areas that are under risk of overweight or obesity. The project develops technologies and methods solidly sort of combined with capacity building, communication, and business and value chain creation together to improve farming practices in fields, nutrition and diets, to produce healthy ingredients and foodstuffs, and also biopackaging materials. InnoFood project is implemented in 8 separate work packages. Work package 1 concentrates on business creation, value chain analysis, also consumer market studies. Work package 2 is about nutrition and diet recommendation, and they are also sort of developed to support healthy food development in work package 4. Work package 3 is about smallholder farming practices, so improving the practices, and it is done particularly by so-called participatory farm research, so that farmers are really engaged to improve their own practices, and the support is of course given to them along the research. Work package 5 is about converting, as said, these crop side streams to biopackaging materials that can be used for locally for improving food safety and preservation, and it is of course about reducing agri-food loss as well. Work package 6 concentrates or focuses on communication, dissemination, exploitation, and all in all, in creating awareness of the project outcomes. It establishes also a so-called innovation platform that is a digital system to engage various stakeholders along the value chain, so that they can easily or most easily adopt the technologies and knowledge and practices that are developed in the project. And they can also, on this innovation platform, create international, national collaboration networks and sort of get themselves certain kind of visibility. Work package 7 is, of course, coordination, quality assurance, risk monitoring, and risk mitigation issues. And finally, work package 8 is to engage and to support every consortium partner to respect and comply ethical and open science, open data principles. The InnoFood impact pathway is shown here. It is distributed to 4 different entities, starting from approach, going via implementation results to impacts. And our approach is, as said already before, is European African multidisciplinary collaboration, and it is also a participatory approach that is sort of practiced with local actors there, local value chain actors. We have 4 countries, African countries involved, as mentioned already, and everything we do is is sort of focusing on innovative and sustainable use of climate smart, climate resilient indigenous crops. Methodologies we use during the project are listed here, and the results we expect to get are also shown here. So we evaluate 2 business models, 2 value chains per each African country. We create 2 complementary food-based dietary guidelines and recommendations per African country. We pilot this participatory farm research and combined trainings all together in 10 sites in these African countries. We develop food ingredients and food products. We pilot 2 bio-based plastic type of materials that can be used, for example, in packagings, food packagings. We train value chain actors comprehensively and also trainers to give training to value chain actors. And then we promote and create this international innovation platform and hope to get various types and powerful outcomes from there. And the impact in the end, or even beyond the end of the project completion, are new business models of value chains that have dedicated and engaged largely value chain actors, so that these models are already running and in force. We have such solutions to fight malnutrition in certain urban areas in these African countries that are already adopted into use. We have local actors who have been empowered by the practices, trainings, and outcomes of the project. And we can see that international cooperation, whether it is among African countries on African continent or with African countries beyond the African continent, but we can already see that these international cooperations have been increased and they are ongoing. So this is more or less what I wanted to say at this phase, a very short recap, and it was my role to give it. And thank you very much for listening to me. And now I give floor to our real experts that will give you, I'm sure, very, very comprehensive and interesting presentations about more detailed aspects about activities that are going on in this project. So thank you very much, and nice and productive, fruitful webinar to all of you. So thank you again, and goodbye.
Good morning, everyone. I will continue from what Dr. Lanto, the coordinator, spoke about InnoFood Africa, and I'm going to give a small overview of what University of Pretoria is going to do and contribute towards the project. And just do a small introduction about University of Pretoria. It was established in 1908. We got more than 59,000 students, and we got 7 suburban campuses. And in terms of research, we are top #1 university of research output in South Africa, and the top 1% in agriculture and social sciences worldwide. We have 9 faculties and 1 business school. And in InnoFood Africa, where we are involved, it's mostly the Natural and Agricultural Science faculty and the Faculty of Humanities. And the department involved from NAS will be Department of Consumer and Food Sciences, Department of Plant Sciences, Department of Agricultural Economics, and the Center of Augmentative and Alternative Communication that form under the Faculty of Humanities. And in terms of InnoFood Africa, you will see that it's quite interlinked, and the approach has been a lot in terms of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach. And in InnoFood Africa, there are 8 work packages. I start with work package 1 to work package 8. And I will show you here, well, as you can see in this diagram, it's quite complicated, but what we can see that each work packages is really interrelated to have this transdisciplinary aspect, also to have synergism. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you briefly where University of Pretoria is involved in most of the work packages and what are the work packages to do so that we can achieve the objectives and the output that Dr. Lanto talked about. Okay. Work package 1 is really to gather consumer insight and developing business model for the whole food system. And this is what the webinar is about today. And it will have the online training toolbox and application of the food-related sensory and consumer method, consumer testing of the developed food prototype that we're also going to do in work package 4 that I will just talk now, as well as the techno-economic feasibility of several product or solution that we are going to find in InnoFood Africa. And here who are involved mostly is Professor de Kock. Okay, she's going to talk about it later on in the seminar about what she's been doing together with Dr. James Makami, and there will also be 2 PhD students and 3 honors students involved there in this work package, as well as there is a research assistant, Mrs. Kenya. And in terms of the techno-economic feasibility, Dr. Jordan, and there will be 1 MSc student involved in this work package. In terms of work package 2, it's really about improve African diet to prevent all form of malnutrition. And here University of Pretoria will be mostly involved in quite a lot of tasks, but the main task is going to be really in terms of food consumption, cross-sectional surveys in Pretoria, Bloemfontein and Heilbron. Pretoria is in the Gauteng province. As you can see down on your left-hand side, you can see in the middle, top right-hand side of the picture, you will see Pretoria there. And if you go a little bit of south-west side of Pretoria, you will see Bloemfontein there. And the picture on your right-hand side, you will see where Bloemfontein is and Heilbron. Heilbron is more a rural area. And here, Dr. Marinel Hoffman from the Department of Consumer and Food Science and 1 MSc student will be working on this aspect. In terms of work package 2, it's really about to improve farming and primary production practices of African food system. And here, what University of Pretoria is going to do, they are going to look at farmers' participatory research in terms of training and good husbandry practices. And we have already the persons involved there, the researchers involved there, has already in contact with Timbali Technology Incubator, okay, where they are going to look a lot at to work with about 20 farmers for product like orange fresh sweet potato, Cowpea and Bambara groundnut. And these products are shown on your on the slides on your right hand side, bottom right hand side. And the professors involved or the researchers involved here is Professor Quentin Kritzinger, Dr. Jordan, Dr. Murray, and 1 MSc student, and there will also be 1 on-site researcher involved. In work package 4 is really to develop safe and nutrient-dense cereal plus root crop fruit-based food ingredient as well as food product. And here the University of Pretoria, in terms of ingredient, we will work on orange fresh sweet potato flour that we are going to produce. Also we'll produce fat replacers, we will produce low glycemic index flours, protein-rich flours, as well as fermented flours. In terms of food product, we will also produce high protein and high fiber expanded snack, instant porridge, pasta, and quick cooking grains as well. And the raw material that we are going to use to work on this fruit ingredient and food product will be mostly sorghum, maize, cowpea, bambara, groundnut, and orange fresh sweet potato. And here it's myself will be involved there with Dr. Clarity Mapengo, and there will be 4 PhD, 3 master, and 4 honors involved there. As well as I will say there is a researcher, Mr. Mapumulo, who is going to be involved in this part of the project. Other staff in the consumer and food sciences will be Prof. Taylor, Prof. Dudu, Prof. Decock, and Dr. Metlo Makulu, who is going to be involved in this project. I will say we have already produced the flour from orange fresh sweet potato and the fat replaces. And work package 5 is to really valorize the biomass residues, and here we are working on packaging material from cowpea side stream. Okay, myself will be involved here with my one PhD student, and work package is really to communicate evidence, information, and knowledge. Okay, and here the University of Pretoria will work in the whole package, but we will focus mostly in terms of adaptation for low literacy how to adapt information for lower literacy users. We will also look at translation into 2 different languages. South African language is Zulu and Sotho, as well as we will look at how we can transfer the technology through the technology toolbox. And here Professor Dada from Augmentative and Alternative Communication, one postdoc, and everyone at UP will be involved here. In terms of management and coordination, it's myself involved here with Mrs. Dursley, Ms. Towley, and Mrs. Pillay from the faculty Faculty of NAS, who is going to be involved here. And work package, everyone is involved there, and this is about ethic application and implementation for the whole project. Okay, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Now you know more about the objectives of the exciting InnoFood Africa project, and I will tell you more about the roles and responsibilities of sensory scientists here in Africa, but also in Europe in this project, and how we can provide answers for agriculture specialists, economists, food scientists, and entrepreneurs. One of the main aims of this project is to produce healthy ingredients, food products, and packaging materials that can reduce loss. And a very important aspect in this context is that the nutritional value of uneaten food is 0. Access to food that is safe and healthy should be basic rights of consumers. Food and beverage intake has a direct bearing on alleviation of hunger and thirst. Nutritious and safe food contribute to the health and nutrition status of consumers, but access to affordable, safe, nutritious food that are also appealing and acceptable contributes to well-being, happiness, and pleasure. I believe that all consumers desire to eat delicious food. What is appealing and considered good tasting is, however, a complicated issue. It is not so easy to measure or to predict what will be acceptable to consumers in different markets. Many factors influence food choices and consumption behavior. Food should be good tasting. And this is almost so obvious that many scientists and food companies forget that this aspect requires serious attention. Much effort is applied to ensure and optimize the safety, the cost, and the health-promoting properties of food. But similarly, the sensory properties needs attention. Sensory science is a multidisciplinary field comprising measurement, interpretation, and understanding of human responses to product properties as perceived by the senses, such as sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. In the InnoFood Africa project, there are lots of stakeholders, and the intention is to stimulate market demand for food items and even packaging concepts that are derived from the specific crops listed here. In doing so, we aim to create opportunities for farmers that are planting these crops and harvesting the produce. Once harvested, seeds, grains, and other raw materials will be processed by small and medium enterprises. Consumers do not eat plants. They mainly consume products in various processed forms. Consumers prepare meals for families, or food businesses will prepare and serve food to consumers via markets, retail outlets, and food service establishments. The value chains for the different crops are diverse and complicated, but in the end, consumers will evaluate whether products fulfill their needs and provide them with the desired level of satisfaction. Sensory scientists are tasked to provide insights to different stakeholders all along the value chain in order for them to make decisions. Our role is to make sure that the decisions made will optimize the sensory properties that consumers expect and desire. To do this, we have a toolbox full of tools, essentially test methods and instruments, and the key is to apply the right tool for the job. In the project, we will support by providing training for researchers in the various countries on the use of the different tools in the sensory science toolbox. We will obtain insights and document information about consumers in the different countries. This will help us when planning consumer studies. We will also develop tools and instruments to better understand the reasons for consumer food choices and the barriers to consumption of the crops. Where required, the tools will be specifically adapted for use in the African countries. We will also assist the researchers in the project to optimize the sensory properties of the products that are developed in order to improve market potential and also to identify the need for adjustments and enhancements. How do we approach a sensory or consumer research project? I use a tried and tested 6-step approach for this purpose. We start the process by taking time to understand exactly what is the question that we are trying to solve. What is the problem that we are trying to solve? In step 2, once we are clear on the question, we can state the objectives for the research. This also gives an opportunity to identify what the potential outcome of the process may be. Step 3 is deciding on the plan, the test options, and the approach. Find the right tool in the toolbox to fix the problem. And when we are ready in step 4, we run the consumer or sensory test. Once we have collected the data, we can now analyze and interpret the results. And finally, in step 6, we can take action and make business decisions. And often, the results that we gather lead to more questions to solve. Here are examples of typical questions for which sensory tests can provide answers. For example, plant breeders may be interested to know which varieties of orange flesh sweet potato will be acceptable for consumers in Uganda. Bakers may want to know what is the difference in shelf life of a whole grain versus a refined grain flour. We may want to find out what changes occur in the sensory properties of teff flour over a period of storage. And more importantly, when will consumers start to complain about the characteristics of a product? Product developers often want to know, how will I know if the new product is good enough for consumers? And in the operations teams, questions pop up like, we are changing the equipment settings and formulation to increase volumes and cut cost of our products. Will consumers notice this? And if they do, will they like the product less? It's also important to find methods to control the sensory quality of products in a company. This brings us to step 3, the plan. And here 4 important decisions need to be made. We have to decide on the methods to use, the people that will evaluate the products themselves, and then the facility or the space and the context that we will use for evaluating the products. If we focus on the methods, there are lots of different sensory methods that will provide different types of information. Some methods are used to test where the products are the same or different. These are important if you make changes to ingredients or processes, but you do not want consumers to notice. Then there are profiling methods that can provide detailed descriptions of the nature and the size of product differences. These are important for product development and shelf life studies. We have a huge toolbox full of methods for consumer studies, ranging from basic methods, for example, to choose which product is preferred between 2 options, and also then more sophisticated methods that can measure the emotions elicited by different products. Methods to observe consumers, to mine social media are also possible. A variety of questionnaires and scales exist to obtain insight on food choice motives. You also have to decide who will be the most appropriate persons to evaluate the food samples. For some tasks, we make use of a small panel of specifically trained individuals that can reliably describe and quantify the nature and the size of product differences. Within food companies, staff members are trained to perform quality control checks. When we are interested in the opinions of consumers that will eat products, we use groups of consumers that represent a certain target market. And the challenge is then to find the right consumers for the task. To ensure that the results are valid, one needs to be very clear on the criteria for selecting consumer participants. Various aspects need to be considered when evaluating food products. The ways of sampling to ensure that the results reflect the problem that is investigated. The format in which you present the samples. Consider the quantity, the type of plate used, the cups, the utensils, or the lack thereof. Many foods are eaten by hand, and hand feel is often a very important quality aspect. We also have to consider how many samples can be evaluated at a time, and do we serve all samples together or one by one? Random serving orders are critical to prevent order bias, and how you identify samples that you present to evaluators is also important. 3-digit code numbers are standard practice. And it's also important to consider what information do we give evaluators about the food samples. When you test products, the context in which you do the evaluation is extremely important, especially when consumers are giving inputs. For analytical tests with trained panels, a sensory laboratory is ideal, however not essential. The key is to understand and apply good sensory practices. For consumer testing, a place conveniently located for consumers, a central location, may be more suitable. You can also obtain very good insight about products when these are evaluated by consumers at home or where a specific product is normally used. Nowadays, sensory scientists are also exploring virtual simulated reality tools to create context for testing products. And in Africa, there are many opportunities that are not yet explored. Other aspects of importance include data collection options. So what do you use to collect your data? It could be pen and paper, it could be observation. Online tools are providing many benefits, especially during the pandemic times. And at times we need to conduct interviews with consumers, especially when there are language barriers or literacy issues to consider. Sound experimental design is critical, and the choice of statistics can also assist to understand the meaning of the data. Ethics is non-negotiable. We are working with human beings, so ethical considerations are important. And as I mentioned, language, the language in which you ask questions, the language that you use on questionnaires are critical aspects as well. You also have to consider the staff available, their experience and their skills, and consider the toolbox that you have available. Some of us have very basic toolboxes to consider, and we do not have sophisticated tools, and then we have to adapt. The take-home messages. The nutritional value of uneaten food is 0. The sensory properties of food are key drivers for consumption. The sensory properties of food contribute to well-being. If you want to solve a sensory problem, use the right tool for the job. And if you cannot do it yourself, call in an expert. Thank you.
I would like to thank the previous presenters because they've already done most of my work. In this talk, I'm going to focus on trying to make a case for why we need to integrate sensory science along the whole food value system. So it is no longer a secret that non-communicable diseases are on the rise in Africa. And we know that most Africans are living with non-communicable diseases, which are lifestyle-related diseases, which predisposes them to disabilities and early death in most cases, especially due to illnesses like COVID-19 in the recent days. So we also know that food is one of the chief risk factors that contribute to non-communicable diseases. But how can we persuade people to eat healthier? So we need to develop sustainable healthy food systems. And we can only do that by infusing sensory objectives into the mix. Now, in a recent paper by Lilliford and colleague, which they titled The Global Missions and the Critical Needs of Food Science and Technology, they make a call, an urgent call, to promote sustainable health food systems by increasing the focus on nutrition. They say that the chief goal of that is to enhance informed food choices and to improve the dietary quality of vulnerable people, which makes a lot of sense because if food is not health and if it does not have desirable sensory properties, people will choose that food, but they will not be healthy at the end of the day. So we need to focus a lot on health and well-being of the people. I will take you a bit back, nearly a decade ago, when an expert was asked to make predictions about the future of sensory science. He mentioned a focus on health. And I'm happy to say that future is here with us today, because recently the National Institute of Health, in a workshop report which was titled Sensory Nutrition and Disease, they make a call for all researchers and all stakeholders to focus on sensory science along the whole food system. Let me just quote what they say. They say taste and smell are going to be important in influencing the probability of food ingestion or rejection, which means we need to think sensory along the whole food system if we are going to roll back the tide of non-communicable diseases globally. So the InnoFood Africa project has already been described by Dr. Lanto and Professor Nashad Emambaks. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. Safe to say that it's going to focus on African indigenous crops to add value to them, to make products that are innovative, products with higher export potential. From crops like Bambara, from crops like cowpea, from indigenous crops like sorghum. So we need to reimage and reimagine the food systems. And we can do that by increasing plant-based foods and keeping check on meat consumption. And in most cases, that means a shift towards healthier diets and more sustainable diets, developing plant products that mimic the taste and texture and experience of consuming beef or milk. Of course, we know that is a very ambitious goal, but nonetheless, it's not an impossibility. It can be done. So as we think about including sensor science in the value system, we must begin to think about answering these three questions. Do we understand the key drivers of food choices and preferences among us African consumers? Because that is very critical. If we don't understand what the African consumers need or require from food, we cannot address their food value systems to promote good health and well-being. The next question is, do we appreciate the often conflicting issues like sensory quality, health and nutrition, the agronomic considerations, and other issues as we are trying to develop more sustainable, locally driven, plant-based value chains? And that's very important because we should understand this so that we strike the balance. The last question is, if we are conscious of all the sensory quality barriers that can be encountered in the process, are we developing innovative technologies to rise equal to these challenges, to solve these challenges? So, as we develop plant-based food value chains, which the InnoFood Africa project seeks to do, it means that plants are going to be the raw materials. And in that case, therefore, we need to understand the chemical profiles of the plants, the acid, the sugar balance, the color compounds, because these determine the sensory characteristics of novel products that the project is going to develop. And that's very important. For example, in terms of texture and mouthfeel, you need to understand whether they are starches, whether they are proteins, the types of these compounds. Because I'll give an example of sorghum. The grittiness, the sandiness, when you are eating sorghum-based products, depend on the sorghum proteins. So we need to understand these things because in the end, the final success of a product with consumers depend on the chemical properties and the sensory qualities of the products. So yes, we agree. I think most of the people know that plant foods are very healthy, but some are bitter too. It's actually a bittersweet relationship. If we take, for example, phytochemicals, they are known to help in dietary prevention of chronic diseases and non-communicable diseases. But we know as well that most of them have aversive and unpalatable characteristics, which pushes away consumers from eating them. For example, when someone walks in a supermarket to buy, they wouldn't buy things that are bitter. They would buy things that are probably sweet, even if they know about the health benefits. So when people are making food choices, it seems that the sensory qualities like taste and flavor tend to dominate much more and heavily compared to nutrition and health benefits. So that's a very important consideration. In the past, the food industry have used methods like debittering to remove these compounds and selective breeding to breed out these undesirable sensory characteristics from consumer goods. Unfortunately, that has made the food system as a whole less sustainable, health-wise. Another aspect that we need to think about is texture in complementary foods. We know that African children are fed on porridges that are based on starchy foods like maize and sorghum and others. And children generally and naturally cannot consume these porridges because their oral processing capacities are limited. So that leads to malnutrition because nutrient intake is limited. But how can sensor science help to optimize these foods? The good news is that UP, University of Pretoria, He has a wonderful history of research in co-optimization of sensory characteristics of foods, as well as health-promoting properties of the foods. So we know that food choice is a very complex phenomenon that is not yet understood by most of us, to such an extent that experts from different fields, marketing, sensory scientists, economists, psychologists, they are grappling with trying to understand what drives consumers to decide on one product instead of another. And we know that these answers will contribute towards making the whole food system sustainable and improving choices of consumers towards more healthier dietary choices. So what is the role of sensory science along the food value chain? Sensory science has multiple roles. One of them is to act as an effective tool of communication. There is what we call a sensory lexicon, which is a language that sensory scientists use to describe products. And that is very important because it means along the whole value system, from the plant breeders to the product developers, to the marketers, to the consumers, we can speak in one language. The new product developers understand what the consumers want when they are making the products, and they can specifically match, leading to a successful product being manufactured. Sensory science can also help in product optimization during product development, and that has been already mentioned. It also helps in understanding the market in terms of the segments that are there, whether they are niche marketing, and also in product positioning. Remember that about 75 to 90% of new products fail in the first year after launch. The reason is a lack of understanding of the sensory characteristics of the products and a lack of understanding of the preferences of the consumers. So another interesting role of sensory science in promoting sustainable food value systems is to comprehend consumers. In this case, this is where our consumer country profiles comes in the InnoFood Africa project, where we are focusing on South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, trying to find out information about the cultures, the way they do their sensory tests, the methods they use, the languages they speak, in terms of sensory and consumer science. And that is very important because this information helps to adapt planning and testing in cost-effective ways. This also helps in designing of valid and reliable testing tools and methods when you are carrying out consumer tests. I'll just give an example here. Do you know that the determinants of food choice may differ with culture and context? And this is why we're looking at consumer country profiles in the 4 countries. In Malawi, for example, people were asked in one study to identify the factors they think are important in choosing food. They said a perception of fullness after a meal was critical for them. So that is very important in understanding the different cultures in sensory science. Now, it is refreshing to note that already stakeholders are beginning to see the value of sensory science along the whole food system. For example, in this case of sorghum, the authors noted that sorghum products have a gritty and sandy texture, and they move on to recommend proposals that are anchored in different levels of the food system. They said we need to focus on genetically improved sorghum varieties which enhance endosperm functionality. And that speaks to plant breeding or plant improvement. The next proposal, they said, we need new processing technologies that improve sorghum functionality and sensory acceptability. That already speaks to the middle part of the food system, which is food processing. And they also emphasize on developing policies that promote sorghum use and eventually encourage healthy food choices. And that speaks to food governance, which is a part of the food system. So it is important that we integrate sensory science along the value system. Now, in conclusion, There is need for us to develop a sensory integrated food value systems. And in doing so, we need to think always about answers to these three questions that I asked from the beginning. Do we understand the key drivers of consumer or food choices and preferences among us African consumers? Do we appreciate the deep and conflicting issues, that is sensory, health and nutrition, agronomic, and other factors, as we develop plant-based food value systems? And lastly, are we developing technologies and methods to rise equal to all these challenges in the process? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for the nice presentation. I wonder if you are seeing my presentation now, because I'm not that familiar with this system. Do you see my presentation now?
At the moment, we just see your desktop.
Let's see. If I have two screens, so it could be. Now, do you see the presentation?
Yes, we do.
Yes, very good. Still seeing it?
Perfect. We see it clearly. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, thanks again for such a nice introduction, and also for the previous two presentations that were extremely clear and inspiring. Today, I've been invited to present some thoughts on rapid methods that could be applied in industrial research and product development. I'm very happy to be part of InnoFood Africa project and being able to learn more about African consumers. So it's really, really exciting to me. So Diete and James were talking right before myself on sensory and consumer methods, and one could say that classically, as Riete was referring, sensory and consumer science can be divided in two big worlds. Analytic sensory methods, where we really measure precisely sensory properties, as Riete was describing, with a big deal of control of what we are measuring, like sample preparation and all the standardization in the tests. And we have a different type of tests that are usually called affective methods, that are looking into consumers' willingness to buy, likings, or more affective approaches with consumers. So these are the two big areas that could be known as sensory science and consumer science. However, in the last 10-15 years, we have landed very different methods that is what I'm going to describe today. Because the main aim of measuring sensory properties is really bridging product and consumers. So when we are, for example, developing products in the industry, or going into detail into different products on a research perspective, we want to understand what we do in the lab or in the process, how will be reflected into consumers' understanding. So classic descriptive analysis tools that have been developed in the last 50 or 70 years and have been really structured are really, really good when we want to get a detailed profile that can help us into different analysis and changes into the products. However, of course, they can be time and resource consuming. So not necessarily small industries have the resources to embark into them. Also, they need product-specific training. So even multinational or global companies don't necessarily have resources to look into this kind of techniques, because if they produce many different products, then it will be difficult to get, for example, stable references and panel trained in all their different products. sometimes also it's difficult to get stable references for training when we are thinking about products that come from the earth, that are based on plant-based ingredients. We know that the crops and the plants can vary from season to season and different growing conditions. So not necessarily the products are maintaining a standard per se, but have a natural variability. So again, classic descriptive methods are not always the response to our research questions. Also, these kind of methods assume that the perception is the same for consumers than trained panelists when we use trained panelists. However, when we resource to very detailed descriptive analysis and we go into attribute by attribute, not necessarily we are reflecting consumer perception, because consumer perception is usually a holistic experience. As consumers, we don't think about bitterness or about consistency, but we think about the general quality and sensory quality of the product. So of course, for certain objectives, a very detailed and standardized method is needed, but for other objectives, it could be that other type of methods that are more holistic could be better suited. And that can be explained because food choices are extremely complex. Of course, the sensory aspects are extremely important for repurchase and for food choices, but are not the only thing that is important in that sense. So when we think about food choices, we can think about three big areas, like it's the person that is making the choice, is the context of that choice, and the product, of course, itself. So, of course, when we go to the supermarket or to a store, we don't always choose the same. If, for example, we are under stress or we are very hungry, at the moment we can buy different set of products that if we are relaxed. If we think when we go to a restaurant, we don't choose the same, or if we are with a group of people eating, it's not the same if we are, for example, with family and friends, that if we are in a business gathering, or, for example, a first date. If we are in a situation that we are not completely relaxed, probably we won't choose some a dish that is difficult to handle, for example, spaghetti bolognese. If we are on a first date, probably we would be looking into choosing something that is easy to eat and that it's not really, no, I'm not going to throw into myself, and so on. So there are many different factors that go around food choices. And when we think about the sensory aspects, is only that small bubble there, the intrinsic product characteristics of the product, so how it's formulated. That doesn't, of course, mean that this is less important. It's very important that the sensory characteristics are right. But also how we communicate these characteristics. James was just talking about how we talk about products, the different vocabulary that we use. Products on the shelves have different communication strategies, different, for example, nutritional or health claims. They talk about the composition. It could be also the brand, the design of the pack, and so on. So this will also influence how consumers make their choices. So how can we take all these factors into account? This alternative of rapid methods that I will briefly mention some are aims not only to reduce time and resources, for example, in the industry, but and that are useful for semi-trained panelists and even consumers, but also can be used to take into account consumer perception. And some of them use holistic approaches that can be closer or reflect the real choosing or buying experience. So these approaches are, to this date, quite different and many. I can mention three types of rapid tools for sensory descriptions that could be used in the industry. Projective mapping is a method that is very flexible and can be used on both intrinsic and extrinsic product attributes like sensory description, but also description of, for example, brand, pack, etc. Check-all that apply is a method that has been used recently very much, that can be combined with acceptability studies that are very easy to run with consumers, or flash profiling that can be used, for example, in product development teams within an industry or a food producer to assess how changes in formulation are working in the sensory aspects of the product. But today I will focus on projective mapping because I don't have a lot of time. So I wanted to give you some examples. So this method can be used, for example, in R&D and new product development, for market exploration of a new category, for communication with consumers to measure expectations, or a concept and product fit, and is a very good tool during product development. This is a very easy method. A consumer can go through it in half an hour maximum, and a consumer can taste different samples, and they will position them in a surface. So we just ask them to taste the samples and position them on a sheet of paper or on a table, so as samples that are similar are placed together and samples that are different are placed away from each other. And then the consumers can write or describe, even orally, it could be, the characteristics of those samples. With only that information, that is very easy for consumers, we don't ask very detailed questions, we can have a lot of conclusions. For example, in this study by one of my PhD students, she was focusing in biscuits that were reduced in sugar, reduced in fat, added in fiber, and she used projective mapping in only the samples, only the packs, some nutritional cards that she put together with the information on the pack, or tasting the samples together with the nutritional information. I'm not planning that you'll read all this table, but just wanted to mention that she got a lot of information on the description of the different samples, packs, and nutritional cards from sensory perspective, for nutritional perspective, and from compositions and ingredients. And this helped to look into expectations when only looking at the pack, or sensory description and nutritional description when tasting. For example, this helped to see that some samples, when putting together how much they liked under description, that some samples could have low expectations when tasted in blind with no information, but when they were provided information, consumers were positively surprised. And these descriptions that they were giving, they were describing, for example, as with sophisticated flavor with apple and green tea. And this could help to know, okay, what they are liking about it. However, in samples like this other one, that the expectations were not fulfilled, we also can know why. For example, because of an insipid flavor and disgusting. Also, we can look into the product concept fit. In this case, they were assessing the same biscuits, how healthy they considered it, and we can see how the pack and the nutritional info are in line with the sample formulation, for example, through this description. This particular sample was regarded as less healthy when tasted blind because the sensory profile did not align with the concept. For example, the no fiber flavor in the biscuit. So it's a lot where one could know about with this undirected description. This method also can be used as a tool for structuring discussions in the product development team. Many times within an industry, the product developers discuss, and also they could be part of the management team, and they feel it could be a bit threatening to describe the sensory perception of some product you are developing if you have your manager there. So one can use individual projective mapping in the development team to structure a tasting, and then have a moderated discussion for consensus. So again, the same exercise, tasting samples, placing them on a paper or surface and describing it. And then this could be analyzed and discussed all together. We have presented that in a conference a couple of years ago. Also, projective mapping can be used for understanding consumer drivers. In this study, we did the same as the one I presented on the biscuits, where consumers tasted bread by itself and with the pack. So in bland and informed scenarios. And we asked also how much they liked it. And in this case, we ran this projective mapping based on choice or preference. So we asked them to put the samples on a table based on their criteria on what you would choose and explain that. What we could see is that this way of running projective mapping gave us a lot of information about their usage and attitudes. So the description they gave was very detailed and linked to the reasons behind their choices. So one can use this information to map the products. These are all the breads that they were tasting. And we could group consumers depending on their liking. In a way, as Riete was explaining, different groups of consumers may have different likings. And with this undirected description, we saw that consumers, for example, in cluster 1, liked medium coarse bread with smooth surface, versatile, easily eating, for kids, for lunchbox, while the other group of consumers like coarse, dark, tasty breads that were more for adults or more exciting in taste. So you can have a lot of information with a 30-minute taste with consumers that is very easily explained, and they don't need to write, they don't need to rate on scale, so extremely easy. So these descriptive methods are very rapid, very flexible, and there is still too much to explore within industrial research and new product development for their application. So we are very excited in InnoFood Africa project to extend this knowledge much more in detail to the different countries, and this kind of method could be applied in the different product development and in consumers of different countries. So thanks very much for your attention.